What is going on, guys? It's been a while, and yeah, I've been very busy, but I'm going to be showing you guys how to use view layers in Blender, and also how to use render passes, and how to, composite it in After Effects and in Blender. But let's just get right into it. Okay, so to develop an understanding of view layers, it's basically pretty much the same scene, but with different collections disabled and enabled in. A very important thing to consider is that you can add in everything in your scene, but you could do the volume as a separate layer, or you could do the effects as a separate layer as well. You don't have to separate every aspect of your scene. Only if it takes too much time to render, that is when you start to create these necessary layers. The use of render layers is, instead of having all of these in one kind of like scene, it has to render all the indirect and everything at the same time. But with these, it's like, for example, the main character on its own, it just renders that literally. It renders the main character, and then you could just add that onto the other layers. That's how useful it is. And then you could also, like, if you have like a volume shader, like if you rendered something, and you can basically reduce the opacity of that volume that's added onto your scene. So that's pretty much, and I hope I explained that alright. But yeah, that's pretty much it. We pretty much set up this whole scene, but with view layers. With the compositing and stuff that you guys can just check out. So that's literally a project file that you can check out below if you ever need help with doing this kind of stuff. Alright, so I'm just gonna start from scratch here. So let's say you have your scene. This is just one example, and so let's say you have a city scene and you got like a dude, I don't know, walking across the street, and it's very intense. It's like the whole, the whole scene is very intense, and you want it to render faster, and you also want to control some of the other effects. So step number one, you've got to organize the whole scene. So that is in the background. So for example, I've separated a lot of meshes. So if I just look at this here, all of this bit is the background. So anything that's like really far away, that has a separation between the foreground or the background. So like, for example, if you have like mountains in the background of your scene, just create a separate collection for those mountains. But then you've got like the main area. So like I usually do the floor and the back buildings around it, sort of. So if I just hide the effects a little bit, so you can see that there's a separation between the foreground and the background. So if I disable the background, you can see that's pretty much the background. And then I've got like the rubbish on the floor, that is separate. So you've got your main character as well. And yeah, and then you've got your effects. So you can render your explosions, your lasers, whatever you have in your scene separately, but just make sure you keep it organized. Okay, so to develop a better understanding of these holdout and indirect, so basically if you have any like object that has like an emission or any kind of like reflections on it, with separate view layers, you want to make sure that that it sort of the lighting is casting onto the other object. So let's say you have two different view layers. So you have the infrastructure, which is your buildings, and let's say you want to render your signs separately. So instead of you sort of like taking it off, imagine adding that glowing sign onto that on a separate layer. There won't be any glowing on this thing, so you would basically set it to indirect, and what that does is sort of hides the whole initial geometry, but it keeps the indirect lighting, especially in the reflections as well. So when you add in that separate layer with just your signs, you basically get the glowing with it as well. Holdout is basically when you have your layers, and so let's say the sign layer is on top of this infrastructure layer. And what would happen is this thing would instead be like in front, something like that. So instead, if I go into the sign layer, what it would do is I would set the whole collection for the buildings to Holdout, and what that does is it sort of creates like a masking kind of thing. So when you add this sign layer on top, it basically sort of cuts it out there, because since there's something in front of it. Let's just get on with the scene now. Alright, so basically what I want to do is, it's pretty much like, it's super simple. So like when you add in a new view layer, all it's doing is just changing the visibility of collections. So if I was to create a new view layer, so I'll create a new view layer, and I'll call it I'll create a background view layer, and so all I want to show is just the background. So if I have a look here, so if I just disable the smoke for a start, so there's nothing on the other collections that has an indirect effect on the background, it's just the lighting, which we don't need to disable. Yeah, so I would just pretty much set everything to holdout, and the reason why we set it to holdout is so then it creates a mask, so we just see the parts that we see in the background. So if we just press that, so we press the holdout on the rest of the collections, and now this is just a layer with just the background, which is very useful. So that would be our first layer that we add in. Now I'll create a new layer, and I'll call this one main area. Also, another thing is to completely disable the effects, unless if the effects have like so if you have an explosion and it's like and you have like the floor as a separate layer, you would set it to indirect. You would have to set it to indirect since it's casting a light onto the initial environment. But since we don't have any effects that cast any like light or have any indirect lighting, we can just disable it completely. We can also disable it in the main area as well. So we disable the effects since we don't need them in the main area, and then what I can do is, since the character is in front, I would set that to holdout, or you could set it to indirect. It's totally up to you. The background can also be a holdout, since this thing here, this mesh here, is a part of the background. If we just set that to indirect, there's just going to be this weird kind of, you know, this mesh is going to be in front of the background, but so we'll have to set that to holdout. So you can see that's cutting it off, which is very useful. And then the rubbish, we can set that to indirect. The cars can also be a holdout, and the foreground can also be a holdout. But it'll take a bit of experimentation on which one works best for your scene. But yeah, so that's pretty much the main area done. So now I've got to create a new one, and this one will be the cars. So this is pretty much, so we can disable the effects, unless if they have an indirect effect on the cars. So for example, if you have like if you have like a car with like a really like shiny kind of like surface, and it can reflect off some of the smoke or any explosion or effects that you have, you definitely got to set it to indirect, since it can sort of have that kind of reflective kind of effect. But I don't really need it at the moment. And then everything else can just be set to, so that can be set to indirect. The foreground can be set to holdout. The background, we completely do not. The background we can set to holdout, indirect, indirect as well. And the main character can be set to a indirect as well. So we just have the cars there. Also, another thing to consider is that if we just take off the main area, you can see that an object in the main area is covering that car there, so you're going to have to set it to holdout, so then it sort of cuts it out, which is very useful. And any rubbish that is sort of in front of the cars, you can set them to holdout as well. So that's pretty much the cars done, and so you just got to repeat the process again with every other layer that you have, every other aspect. You don't have to do everything with every other aspect that you have, and you can just repeat the same thing for the rest of them. Also, another thing to consider is create a new view layer, but with everything like visible, so that then you can at least, like, you know, adjust the scene however you like. Just make sure that in the view layer properties it's set to not used for rendering. So if you uncheck that, and that basically sort of it doesn't render the whole thing, but this is just like an area where you can just move things around, and just so you can see everything basically. Okay, so now for the smoke, everything can be set to holdout, and for the volume you can disable the smoke and set everything to a holdout as well. So now you can see you've got that nice depth in the scene from the volume. So that's pretty much it. That's if you want to add volume as a separate render layer. So that's pretty much the volume as a separate render layer, and that really does help because volume does take up a lot of memory. Also make sure that you disable the volume with the smoke as well. Okay, so now once you've got all these render layers done, all you need to do is just render. Okay, so once you've done rendering, all you gotta do is just close this window, and then if you go to the compositing tab, you notice you have your this render layers. And so all you've got to do is just duplicate this and select another render layer. So I want to start like from, so the top is going to be the one in the back. So for example, the background, and then the one next to that is the main area. So I'll set this to main area. Yeah, and so all you got to do is just duplicate these and select every single view layer. All you need to do is just add in an alpha over node, So what this does is just like removes, it just composites it on top. So now you can see you've got the background, and then this just combines the two. So now you've got both of those combined, and you can see it looks really. Then I'll add in another alpha over and mix these together. So now the cars are added in, and you can see that there's still shadows from the cars since we set them to holdout. And you just repeat this as you go down. Okay, so once you've set everything up, you could pretty much just toggle the opacity of everything. So for an example, all the smoke that I've added in the background, you can toggle the opacity of that, and you can do the same with the initial volume as well, which is absolutely awesome. But there's another thing. So instead of you just so now once you set this to the composite, wherever you export it in this area, wherever you export it to, will export the whole composite, so this whole all together. But if you want to export these separately, so you can composite them in an external software like After Effects, it's fairly simple. All you need to do is just add in a file output node, and then add in like a bunch of inputs. And then like, so for the first one, I want to add in just the background. So if I want the background layer as a separate, as a individual file, all I need to do is just plug it into the first one, and I'll call this background. And then you do the same for the rest of them. So an easy way of doing this is if you click Alt and then right-click drag. So once you click render, it will all export to that individual folder. So in After Effects, all you gotta do is just drag them all in, and you got all your layers. All you gotta do is just rearrange them to the correct layers. And so now, for an example, if I don't like the volume, I can just bring down the opacity and do whatever you like with it. Now, if I'm doing an animation, I usually use OpenEXR multilayer. So I've done a test render, and I'm just gonna save it as a OpenEXR multilayer, and then import that in. And it will be blank because we need to add in an extractor effect. That should be built in, so you don't need to install any plugin for that. And you basically have all your layers. Now I can select my my smoke layer, and you can see we've got the nice smoke, and then you've got foreground, background. So all you gotta do is select the composite.combined, and then it basically brings everything in. So it's a bit darker than the original because we need to add in a open color IO. This is a plugin, so I'll put a link in the description for a tutorial on using this. It just sort of matches the colorization to Blender's Filmic sRGB, I think. But yeah, so if I just select custom, and I'm just gonna select this one here. It'll show you in the tutorial on how to get this. But once I select that on the output space, I'll just hit Filmic sRGB, and it pretty much looks like the previous one. So now that's pretty much it, and now you can just switch between the cars and everything else. So now if you import your animation as an EXR sequence, all you need to do is just select the composite combine and do all this stuff, instead of you having all of these different layers. Another tip is that you can use masking. And masking is super useful for sort of adding in like the compositing elements in certain like areas of the render. So, and I'm just going to create a separate folder called masks. So I want to keep all of these inputs because I want to use the masks in these. So all I need to do is just add these into this file output node. Another thing to consider is that you don't have to use all the masks of these. So you could just use the masks of like the main area. So then like in the background area you could add in some smoke or extra stuff, whatever you like really. So now that it has exported all the masks, I'm just going to show you guys an example of what you can do. So I'm just going to use the background, so import that in. And then I can basically use that mask. So if I just Control Alt Y to create an adjustment layer. So let's just say I wanted to blur out the background. I'll basically add in a Gaussian blur. So if I bring that up, you can see it's blurring everything. So now if I apply the track matte to the background, you can see it's all being isolated into that one kind of area where the mask is. Alright, so this is just an example, but let's just say I wanted to add in some like extra fog in the background in After Effects. All I've got to do is just set the track matte to that background, and you can see it's being isolated towards it. Set that to screen, you can see how we've got more fog in that background area, so which is really useful, and you could do so much more stuff with this. It's super useful, and you can do this with the rest of the masks and whatever. So all I need to do now is just set up the passes. So I usually select the Z, the mist, and all of this stuff here, so the emission environment, ambient occlusion, shadow catcher, or whatever else you feel like you need. So if you go into rendered mode, you can see the render pass, and you can basically sort of view all of these passes. So you can view the emission, which is pretty much from the smoke or the lights or whatever you like. But then you've got the mist pass, which is the most useful one in my opinion. So all you need to do in the camera settings, just set the viewport display and select mist. So now it shows you the start of the mist and then the end of the mist. And then to adjust it, you go into the world settings and you basically go down to here and you can set down the mist pass. So now if you go into rendered view now with this mist selected, you can basically sort of change the start and the depth of it. I like to give it a nice like high depth on it. If you don't have separate view layers for your whole scene, like what I've done, like for the background and everything. Okay, so this is just an example, but let's just say that you've rendered your whole scene without any other view layers. To add mist, all you need to do is just add in a mix and plug the mist into the bottom value. And now you can change so I think you can set it to screen or add, it's up to you. I like to use screen, and then now you can bring down the opacity and you've got your nice kind of mist pass. I also like to add in a color ramp, and then you can sort of change the values of your mist. So I'll set that to ease, and then if there's a bit of noise on your mist, which is very common, just add in a denoise node, and then that just sort of cleans it up a little bit. And then so now when we preview this, you can basically see how the mist is affecting the whole environment, and you could change it around. But if you want to add it in an external software like After Effects, all you gotta do is create a separate file output. So create another mist and then just set your file location and then plug the mist into there, and that will export separately, even as an animation as well. So it'll export as a PNG sequence. Yeah, so that's pretty cool, and you could even export it as an OpenXR multilayer from this thing here, from this file output node, which is super cool. But in our case here, since we're using multiple view layers in the scene, I would go into every scene and select the same kind of passes, which are just these ones. And I'm just going to give it a quick render. Okay, so after that, now we have all the mist on all of these view layers. And if you preview these, you can see you've got the mist for these. And to combine all of these, all you need to do is add in a math node and then set it to multiply. So if you plug the mist of the first layer into the top value, and then you want to do the same for the rest of them. So if I duplicate this and add that there, and then I do the same for the cars. Okay, so you don't need to do it for the volume, but if we preview this now, you can see how all the mist passes are sort of combined. But you can see we have a few problems here. So I think the one with the main character we got to set to minimum, and the same with this one here. So I set that one to minimum. I think we should set all of these to minimum, I guess, instead of multiply. But what I notice is that there's these weird artifact lines around these areas, and that means that they need to be set to indirect. So for an example, so you can see on the main area view layer, the mist has these as a holdout, and that is exactly why there is these weird outlines. So if I go over to the main area and if I go to the layout, and if I click on the cars, instead of holdout, I will set them to indirect, and that basically just removes them from that. And the same for the foreground, I'll set those to indirect as well, so we don't run into any problems. After that is rendered, you can see that there is absolutely no white outline artifact, which is great. And so another thing you can do is just duplicate this and take off all these outputs, and then create a new output and call it mist. Set your file location to mist, and then all you need to do is just plug this into the file output, and then that will export. And if you want to add it in Blender, you just got to add in a mix. You plug this into the bottom input and this into the top input, and so now you basically get your really cool mist pass in Blender. But I like adding it separately, so I'll just keep this to its original thing, and then this can be the separate thing. So now if we render this and import it into After Effects, then we can use that. Okay, so here we are in After Effects. I'm just going to import in the mist pass, and you can see it's It's done a pretty good job of it. Just gotta set it to screen, and yeah, there we go. So to adjust this mispass, I just use a curves, I guess. Could use the curves to differentiate the kind of fall off and stuff. So, and then I can add in some levels to sort of bring the mist a bit more forward a little bit, I guess. So now you could even add depth of field in a render as well. So if I just add in a new adjustment there, and you can add in any type of blur, it's up to you. I'm just doing a really simple example. You could do so much with the mispass. You could also use the mispass as a mask as well. But for a start, I'll just add in some Gaussian blur, and then I'll use the mist as a luma matte. So now you can see that if I just hide these, and if I add in just a simple levels, so now you can control where this blur is. So if I just increase this a little bit more, you can see how it's adding that in. Yeah, and so when you increase the value, you can see how the values on the mist pass are affecting it. So where the white areas are is where the blur will mostly be. So I can basically sort of I want to bring the whites a little bit more kind of closer. And so I use this technique in my Endless Engines challenge. I basically sort of got my mist pass, and I made sure that it was like far right in the back. So I made sure it was isolated to the back. So I just made it a little bit blurry in the background, and it actually really helped. Yeah, but then you can also invert it as well, which is also really cool. So, but yeah, you could use this for all sorts of stuff. You can even create a cool Spider-Verse effect as well. So if I apply this to the mist, you can see that because usually in Spider-Verse you get this like chromatic aberration that happens in the background. And so if I just, if I can reduce this, I don't know if I can reduce this, yeah, there we go. So now you can see in the background there's a cool chromatic aberration effect, and you can really, so I'm just gonna increase these, and I'm just messing about at this point. You can randomize it, I don't know. But yeah, I actually really like that effect. Okay, so another thing is that these other open areas, so if I go to the background, usually you would get the HDRI there. So if you want to show the HDRI in your render, all you gotta do is, if you click on the environment, it shows you it there. You gotta do is get another alpha over and plug the environment into the, I think it's the top value. So now if we preview this, you got the, there you go, see you've got the HDRI. So now if we preview this again, you can see there's the HDRI in the background. And yeah, hope you found this video useful, and yeah, if you have any questions, just feel free to ask, and then I'll just let you know. I'll see you guys in the next video.